I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio. So today we're talking about 3 steps to help you get past a mistake or failure. We're going to cover how our own perspective on mistakes has evolved over time, when to know if you should stop a project that's not going well or just persevere, and our 3 steps you can go through when you're frustrated by a mistake. All right, so our icebreaker for today: what is the worst fabric choice you have ever made, Haley?
Oh, gosh. I think that the worst fabric choice I've ever made was I had drafted this sheath dress and it had a princess seam. And it wasn't a traditional princess seam. Instead, it came to like a really severe corner at the waistline, creating like, it was very like, I don't know, future. I thought I was really doing something. Anyway. Princess seams, but make it future. Anyway.
The future of princess seams.
Right angles. So I chose this like stretch jacquard. And first of all, it was just like a weird texture. And then it was like really stretchy for a stretch woven. And getting those corners that had to be like, they're definitely the focal point of the garment and very central and right on the waistline. I had to get them both perfectly symmetrical. And this fabric was just moving around and stretching. And by the end, I had ripped out the seam so many times that it had just totally stretched the fabric. And it had made the waistline a dome shape. Because it was so stretched right there at the waist. And I washed the fabric and steamed it and tried all of my tricks. I just could not save it. And it was, it may have been kind of an ugly garment anyway, but it probably would have been kind of cool at least if I had chosen a better fabric.
Yeah, those jacquards can really stretch out sometimes.
Yeah, it was wild. What about you, Sarai? What was your most regrettable fabric choice?
Well, I wrote about this one. I don't know if this is my most regrettable. I've definitely sewed some things in the past in like polyester, whatever, that just did not, hold a press and looked probably pretty cheap and terrible when I was younger. I just had another one that came to mind, actually. So I'm gonna share two. So one of them I wrote about in our newsletter recently, which was that it was also a sheath dress, and I made it out of this, I guess it was sort of like a cotton shirting type fabric. It was like a lightweight cotton. So I needed something crisp for the dress because it had, it was very like tailored style. So I wanted a really crisp fabric, but it was also very thin. And the fabric was this like peachy, tannish color. So when I finished it, because it was so thin, it just looked like it was made out of paper. Like it looked like a dress that was made out of a paper bag. Like it was so, like you could see every wrinkle on it. It was just not a good look. So that's one of them. And then I was thinking about when I was real young and I had first learned to sew, and, I had kind of crazy high school style, and I would just buy like whatever fabric I liked the look of. And I remember I had this skirt that I made it was like a mini skirt, and it was made of purple cotton velveteen, but it had an elastic waist. So it was like really like bunchy at the waist.
Ooh.
And then it had like this black organza ruffle, like that pre-ruffled trim you can buy. I wanted to mention that one because that was probably a bad fabric choice, but I really liked that skirt and I wore it all the time. So like looking back on it now, it was a bad fabric choice, but at the time it was dope. I loved it.
It was giving everything you wanted it to give.
Yeah. I wore it with like band t-shirts with the neck cut out, and that was my look.
I can tell you that Haley in high school would have approved of this ensemble for sure.
So if you have an icebreaker for us that you'd like us to do in a future episode, You can leave it for us on the community if you're a member. You just go to seamwork.com/go/icebreakers, and that'll take you right to the thread on the community where people share their icebreakers. So I'd love to hear one from you guys.
So today we're talking about mistakes or failures. And when Sarai and I were discussing this episode, we were like, we should share like one of our like, a recent failure. And this one came to mind for me. And this was, I guess, not so recent, but a few years back when we were working on the Crosby swimsuit pattern, when it was in development, we were working on the member bonus variation. And if you're familiar with that pattern, now the member bonus that you have in your mind is very different than what we had started with. So the Crosby swimsuit is very vintage inspired. It has the lovely gathers along the side seam. And for the member bonus, I wanted to do a high neck halter version. So we set out, we were doing all of the development, sewing all of the samples, and every single fitting, this high neck halter was not working. And it was this combination of the anchor point being really central on the body and then all of that excess fabric you have from the gathers. It was looking a hot mess. It was not a pattern that anybody was going to want to sew, but we just kept going and going and going on it and not really like stopping to like reevaluate, is this working? We just were like so set on this idea that we didn't stop. This was probably about within my first few months of being the designer here at Seamwork. And with Seamwork, we are on like a very rigid monthly deadline. Rain or shine, we're going to put out 2 new patterns every single month. And it was this huge lesson for me about how to deal with failure. And it gave me some kind of tools that I use now as pattern designer, but also in my personal life on like how I deal with just flops when they show up. Because when you sew, you flop. You flop a lot.
Yeah. So what ended up happening? You want to talk about what ended up happening with that particular design?
I think like 8 protos in, something ridiculous, which just for like our listeners' knowledge, by the time we start working on a bonus variation, the pattern itself has been usually fit approved. And so all of the fit kinks have been worked out. So typically for a bonus, for us to get that like little design detail right, it takes us 2 prototypes, maybe 3 on something more challenging. So 8 was just a lot. Yeah. It was a lot. And finally, I think that there may have been tears, and it may have been me. The pattern makers and I had this heart to heart, like, there's no way this is going to work. And we had to stop and kind of reevaluate. I went to my desk. I sketched a whole bunch of ideas. I brought it over to their desk. We decided on like the one that we thought was going to be the most like valuable to members, the most exciting to people, but also was going to be something that we could make happen in a couple weeks because we were like running up against this deadline. But that was the outcome of that. And I will say that people really like the member bonus. We basically omitted all of the gathers and the surplice style neckline and just for more of a scoop neckline. And it's really cute. It's really simple, just more of a simple Maylot style. But people love it. I feel like they make it just as often as they make the regular version of Crosby. So ultimately it ended up, working out really well. But not until we had literally run ourselves into the ground working on this idea that just was not going to work with the constraints that we had.
Mm-hmm. And isn't it funny that sometimes you will just be so committed to something just because you've already put so much work into it that you kind of ignore the simple solution.
Yeah.
And sometimes the simple solution is the better solution.
Yeah, it felt like admitting failure, I knew the idea was possible, but it wasn't going to be a bonus variation anymore. It was going to be an entirely different pattern. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean when I say that the constraints just were not going to work for us. But ultimately, I think that like I'm happier with where it ended up than I would have been if we had gone with the original design. But I just got so stubborn. And I think it's really common to get into this really like stubborn mindset when you're coming up against mistakes or failure.
Yeah. It's almost like you tell yourself, I should be able to do this. So I'm just going to keep working harder at it instead of rethinking things and maybe taking a step back.
Sarai, do you have a time that you've ever persevered on a project when you probably should have just stopped?
Oh, yeah. I've had many times where that's happened. I think most often it comes up when maybe like the design doesn't suit me or it's not going to fit me correctly no matter what I do. It's not going to look great on my body, or it's not going to look to my preference anyway. I think that's when it's hard to know when to stop, because you begin maybe the fitting process, or you start actually sewing the garment and you kind of realize this, but you think, well, maybe I can fix it. How do I know if I can't fix it? That's, I think, when it comes up the most for me in sewing. Do you think that your tolerance to failure has changed through sewing or through other types of craft?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that more and more, the longer that I've been, sewing has been part of my life and like other miscellaneous crafts, the less I blame the mistakes on me as a reflection of me and my personal failings. So I take it a lot less personal now than I did in the beginning. I think that's because when failing takes practice, and failing gracefully takes practice, and the more you like put yourself out there creatively and make things with your two hands, the more you're going to fail. That's just kind of like a fact. And so I'm a little more graceful about it now, but I still fail at a lot of things. I always say that my rate of failure is like 1 out of every 4 projects.
I think it's interesting that you say that it takes practice, because I think also responding to failure takes practice. And I think sewing or other forms of craft teach you how to respond to failure, or, you know, different ways that you can respond to failure, just because it happens pretty often when you're making anything that you're going to have a mistake, or you're going to have something that goes wrong, or an overall failure, catastrophic failure. So I think it's just something that you get used to, but you also learn maybe some different ways to respond. And I think that can come through in other parts of your life as well, as you learn, you know, you don't have to take it personally, or you don't have to see it as a flaw in your skills or your abilities. It's just part of the learning experience. And I think that's a really valuable lesson. I think for me, I've learned that with sewing, just because I feel like with sewing, there are a lot of mistakes. Like frustration happens. I make a mistake or have a moment of frustration, or, you know, can't get my machine to do what I want it to do, you know, at least once during every project. And so it comes up pretty frequently with sewing. I think the other thing that's really changed my relationship to mistakes is knitting, though, because with knitting, it's so slow and so time consuming. And if you make a mistake, and this has often happened to me, you realize that you made a mistake, but it was way down, you know, several rows down, and it's just going to compound if you keep going. So you have to rip back and undo all this hard work that you've spent maybe even weeks doing, and do it again. And so with knitting, if you're going to keep doing it, like, you're going to have those moments and just realize, okay, well, I now need to spend an extra 3 weeks on this sweater that I wasn't anticipating. And that's okay. I can be okay with that, because I'm here to enjoy the process and enjoy making something with my hands. So I think that's really helped me to really just appreciate that mistakes are all a part of it. And if you have to redo it, you have to redo it. It's just normal. Do you find that you still get frustrated a lot when you're sewing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, every time I like have to rip a seam, I'm like, dang it. I get frustrated, but I don't know if I like react as much as maybe like I did in the past. I don't think I'm a very like reactive person in general. When I get frustrated, if it's like, you know, beyond, if I feel like a physical response to my frustration, I just usually walk away and go get a cup of coffee or something, come back to it. What about you? Do you still get frustrated when you sew?
Yeah, I think like you, there's always moments of frustration, like I said, but over time, I've become less upset about them. In the beginning, it was definitely very upsetting when you would have a seam you had to rip out or something worse, or even just a project not working out, or, your tension's off or your thread is getting tangled or whatever. Those kinds of things can drive you nuts. And I think I used to get really upset about them sometimes because you'd tell yourself, like, this is supposed to be fun. Why is this not working? And just work yourself into a tizzy about it. I mean, partially it's probably just people do tend to get a little calmer as they get older. But I think also just getting used to making mistakes, like we've been talking about, I think is a big part of it.
And I think that the more sewing experience you have, the easier. It's less frustrating when you realize what went wrong. When you're a beginner, you kind of don't know what you're doing still. And, your machine keeps doing a weird thing, or you can't figure out like why the tension is this way. It's frustrating because you may not know the why behind the mistake. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot easier to like blame yourself for doing something wrong if you don't understand the why.
That's really true. Yeah. You become better at diagnosing what the problem is. And so that makes it less frustrating because you know how to fix it. I think that's a big part of it. You're right. How often do you feel like you have a sewing fail? You said 1 out of every 4 projects. You think that's like a complete fail?
Yeah, that's like a complete fail. That's like this project is like unwearable, or I'm going to have to like give it away to someone who I know will wear it, or like salvage the fabric some way. I would say like, yeah, maybe I think like 1 out of 4. That's kind of bad.
Wow.
No, it's not. I mean, it's just things just don't turn out the way you want. I also like allow myself those failures, but I would say like I fail at some point in every sewing project.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I should really do the math on that and see if my rate of failure has changed. I'm going to go like count all of my recent sewing projects and update you on that rate. What about you, Sarai?
I don't think my rate of failure is that high, but I think it's because I'm not that ambitious in my sewing these days. Like I tend to make things that I know are going to work or that are just easy projects. And I'll sprinkle in a few more challenging things when I feel like it. But I'm really enjoying some easy sewing these days. Just, stuff that either because it's loose fitting and comfortable or it's something I've made before or it's just, very simple project. That's what I'm enjoying right now. So I think that helps with having a lower rate of failure.
Oh, for sure.
I still have them for sure.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll just, if I have a mistake, I'll just live with it. And sometimes the whole project gets scrapped. It depends. But they come up for sure. So let's share our steps. We have a few steps that we've come up with. You want to go through them, Haley?
Yes. So this is more or less kind of the process that I use as a designer that comes up against mistakes from time to time or just roadblocks. And I also apply this to my own personal life a lot. So 3 steps for getting past your mistakes. Step number 1 is just to allow yourself to feel bad. I think when you don't let yourself feel that feeling, that it's going to come through during the rest of the project in one way or another. So I think taking a break, stepping away, make yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. Then remember why you were excited about the project. I think that this can be a really helpful exercise because sometimes it can be so frustrating when you make a mistake or you're on the brink of failure that you want to give up entirely. And remembering why you were excited about the project in the first place can reignite that spark of excitement for you. And also just remember that everyone makes mistakes. Everyone gets frustrated. Remember that I fail 1 out of every 4 sewing projects. And maybe you'll feel a little bit better.
I think this is actually a really important point. I think it really helps me, not just in the case of sewing or when making mistakes or anything, but just anytime I'm feeling bad, one of the things that helps me is just remembering that everybody feels bad sometimes. It's not just me. I'm not alone in this. Like, this is a universal thing. Everybody feels bad. And it just kind of, in that moment of frustration or anger or just being exhausted or overwhelmed or whatever you're feeling, it connects you to other people. And I think that's really helpful and healing when you're in a bad place.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of having this like pause moment to remember all of these things really like helps you move forward with these like next two steps with a little bit more grace for yourself. Step number 2 that I suggest is to figure out how much time you're willing to put into fixing it. Now, sometimes this fix is going to be like really obvious. It's like you set the zipper in incorrectly and you need to rip it out and put it back in. Other times there's going to be like more complex, scenarios. And I think that it's really important to evaluate how much time you're willing to put into fixing it, because that'll help you with the decision-making process that you are going to take in step 3. And step 3 is to identify the ways that you can fix it, make a little list, and then come up with a plan B. If those fixes don't work, then what am I going to do? So that can be like, how are you going to salvage the fabric? Are you going to make 20 scrunchies out of your scraps?
Who couldn't use 20 scrunchies?
Are you going to turn the dress into a top or a skirt, which I have definitely done before? Think about what you could do with the fabric if you spend some time on fixing the mistake and it's just not working. Also, think about how you can learn from it. Maybe you don't have the right tool for the job. Maybe you need a different kind of presser foot to really be able to do a really great rolled hem or whatever the technique that you're trying to tackle. Maybe you need a new technique. Think about what you can learn from it, because even our like worst failures, most unsalvageable failures, there's a lesson to take away from it.
Yeah, I think those are all such awesome tips. I feel like that process, that just having those 3 steps in your mind, it's 3 steps so it's easy to remember. I think that's just so helpful, because when you're in that frame of mind, when you're feeling frustrated, that's a moment where you're like least likely to, I think, tell yourself the right things. So it's nice to have something that you can turn to that's just like boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just going to recap those 3 steps for everybody so that they can cement them in their minds. So the first step is to just let yourself feel bad if you're feeling bad. And if you need to, you can take a break. Remember why you were excited about the project. And just remember that everybody makes mistakes. So kind of calm yourself and let yourself feel whatever you're feeling. And step 2 is to figure out how much time you're willing to put into fixing whatever the problem is. And then step 3 is identify the ways that you can fix it, and also identify your plan B if that doesn't work. So those are the 3 steps. Hope they're helpful for you all. And if you're looking for something that's more of an easy win, something that's real easy to sew, then we recommend our free quince pattern, which you can download on our website for free. The quince is a really easy, versatile robe style jacket, and it has 2 lengths and mix and match design details. So it has up to 16 variations, which is really cool. And you can also use a really huge variety of fabrics. So you're less likely to choose the wrong fabric for this one, because there's really no bad choices for quince. And it's also one of our most popular patterns. So if you'd like to get it for free, you can download it at seamwork.com/go/quince. So that's seamwork.com/go/quince. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. And if you liked this episode, please leave us a review. We would love to hear from you. We have a review from, oh my goodness, how do I say this, Haley? Hey, Belinda.
Nailed it.
Belinda. It's a Duhhh at the end. Okay, so Hey Belinda says, I've always had a thing for sewing as my creative outlet, but after a hiatus, my passion has been reignited. I find myself relating to most of the guests the show has, and it's been really enlightening to say the least. I'd highly recommend to anyone, especially if they're in a creative slump. Oh, thank you so much, Belinda. That's really, really kind of you. I love that. That's really appreciated. So if you'd like to leave us a review, we read every single review. We love hearing from you all. So you can do that on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever podcast player you choose to listen to us on. And you can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. That's the name of our channel. And you can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork and become of our private community, plus you get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, our podcast listeners get a 50% off lifetime discount when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. So that's seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And that'll take you right to the page with a discount already applied on it. And it's a lifetime discount, which means that you get to keep that 50% off a year price for as long as you're a member, which is really, really awesome. So with that, we're going to say goodbye for this week. I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.